Fame in the 1960s and 70s came with almost no accountability. The music was great, the crowds were massive, and a lot of people got away with a lot, until they didn't. Some fell because of addiction, some because they couldn't keep their worst impulses in check, and others because the things they did behind closed doors eventually came to light. These are 15 music stars from the 60s and 70s that deserved their downfall. Number 15. Ike Turner. Ike Turner was one of the most important figures in the development of American rhythm and blues. As the leader of the Kings of Rhythm in the early 1950s, he helped shape a sound that would become rock and roll. When he discovered Anna Mae Bullock, the young singer who would become Tina Turner, he recognized her talent immediately and built an act around her. The Ike and Tina Turner Revue became one of the most powerful live acts in the country, and their 1971 recording of Proud Mary brought them mainstream recognition and a Grammy Award.
Proud Mary, keep on burning.
But behind that success was a sustained pattern of abuse that Tina Turner documented in detail across 2 memoirs and multiple interviews over the decades. She described years of physical beatings, financial control, and psychological domination. Ike broke her nose, her jaw, and burned her with hot coffee. He controlled her earnings, her wardrobe, and her movements. She attempted suicide in 1968 and still could not leave. It wasn't until 1976, when she finally fled with almost nothing, that the marriage ended.
Big wheel, keep on turning.
When Tina went public with her story in 1981, it cost Ike everything that remained of his public standing. His career had already stalled, his cocaine addiction had become severe, his behavior erratic, and his commercial relevance gone. He served time in prison in the 1980s for drug-related offenses. He died in 2007, largely alone. In the decades after their split, Tina Turner became one of the most celebrated comeback stories in music history. Ike became a cautionary one.
Rolling, yeah. Rolling.
Number 14. Sly Stone. In the late 1960s, Sly Stone was building something genuinely new. Sly and the Family Stone was a racially integrated mixed-gender band that combined soul, rock, funk, and gospel into a sound that no one had heard before. Their 1968 and 1969 run of hits placed them at the center of American pop culture, and their appearance at Woodstock in 1969 was one of the festival's defining moments. But the early 1970s told a different story. Stone's cocaine and PCP use became all-consuming. In 1970 alone, he missed nearly a third of the band's scheduled concerts. Promoters across the country stopped booking them because the risk of a no-show or a walkout was simply too high. When shows did happen, they were often disasters. Recording sessions at the Beverly Hills mansion where the band lived devolved into non-stop parties, with mobsters and bodyguards surrounding Stone as he burned through his talent and his relationships. By 1975, the band was finished. Stone attempted a solo career but never came close to recapturing what he had made. By 2011, he was reported to be living in a camper van in a rundown Los Angeles neighborhood, homeless and nearly broke. He passed away in June 2025 at age 82. The tragedy of Sly Stone is not just personal, it's musical. The records he could have made in the decade after 1971, the direction he could have taken, was lost to a drug habit that consumed everything around him. Number 13. Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison was genuinely gifted, a poet and performer with unusual intelligence and a stage presence that drew people in. The Doors, formed in Los Angeles in 1965, produced some of the most distinctive rock music of the late 1960s. Morrison's voice and the band's keyboard-driven sound set them apart from nearly everything else on the radio. But Morrison's behavior made him almost impossible to work with and damaging to the people around him. He drank heavily and continuously. His most serious legal trouble came after a 1969 concert in Miami, where he was charged with indecent exposure and profanity. He was convicted on 2 misdemeanor counts in 1970, leading to concert cancellations and venue bans across the country. By 1971, he had left the band and moved to Paris, where he died in July at the age of 27. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure. The romantic mythology that built up around him afterward did not change what his behavior cost others while he was alive. Number 12. Gary Glitter. Gary Glitter was one of the biggest names in British glam rock during the 1970s. Born Paul Gadd, he sold more than 20 million records and had 26 hit singles, with 12 reaching the UK top 10. His stage persona, glitter suits, platform boots, and theatrical energy made him one of the most recognizable performers of the era. For much of the decade, he was a genuine pop star. The collapse of his career began in 1997, when a computer technician discovered thousands of images of child sexual abuse on a laptop he had brought in for repair. Glitter was arrested, and in 1999 he pleaded guilty to downloading child pornography. He served 4 months in prison. That should have ended things entirely, but what followed made it worse. He relocated to Southeast Asia, where in 2006 he was convicted in Vietnam of committing sexual offenses against 2 girls aged 10 and 11. He served 27 months and was deported. Back in the United Kingdom, he was arrested in 2012 under Operation U-Tree, the investigation into historical child sexual abuse. In 2015, he was found guilty of attempted rape, 4 counts of indecent assault, and 1 count of having sex with a girl under 13. The victims were children he had invited backstage during the 1970s. He was sentenced to 16 years. Released halfway through his sentence in 2023, he was back in prison within weeks after reportedly attempting to access the dark web. The judge at his 2015 sentencing found no evidence of remorse. Number 11. James Brown. James Brown spent most of the 1960s and early 1970s earning the title the hardest working man in show business. His influence on funk, soul, and rhythm and blues was enormous and genuine. He performed relentlessly, demanded discipline from his band, and built a catalog that shaped decades of popular music. He was inducted into the inaugural Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class in 1986. But by the mid-1980s, Brown's personal conduct had become a sustained pattern of violence and recklessness. He developed a severe addiction to PCP, angel dust, and the drug produced repeated violent outbursts. His third wife, Adrienne Rodriguez, had him arrested 4 times between 1987 and 1995 on charges of domestic assault. In one incident, she reported he had beaten her with an iron pipe and fired a rifle at her car. In September 1988, Brown stormed into an insurance seminar next to his office, brandishing a shotgun and claiming strangers were using his bathroom. When police arrived, he fled in his pickup truck, leading officers on a 2-state car chase through Georgia and South Carolina. He rammed police vehicles and drove on blown-out tires for miles before being stopped. He was convicted of carrying a deadly weapon, assaulting a police officer, and multiple drug and driving offenses, and sentenced to 6 years in prison. In 2004, at 70 years old, he was arrested again on domestic violence charges against his 4th wife. The pattern never fully stopped. Brown's musical legacy is real. So is the documented record of harm he caused across multiple relationships over multiple decades. Number 10. Jerry Lee Lewis. Jerry Lee Lewis was one of the most electrifying performers in the history of rock and roll. His piano playing and stage energy in the late 1950s were unlike anything audiences had seen. He was recording for Sun Records at the same time as Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash. And for a brief period in 1957 and 1958, he seemed destined for the same level of stardom.
Good enough for me and
Then, in 1958, it emerged that he had married his 13-year-old first cousin once removed, Myra Gale Brown, and that the marriage had taken place before his divorce from his previous wife was finalized. He was 22 years old at the time. The news broke during a UK tour. The backlash was immediate, and his mainstream pop career essentially ended overnight. Venues canceled. Radio pulled his records. Lewis continued recording for decades afterward, largely within country music, and had genuine chart success in that genre through the 1960s and early 1970s. But the rock and roll career that had seemed inevitable in 1957 was gone. He was married 7 times in total, and the circumstances of several of those marriages drew further controversy. He died in October 2022 at the age of 87, leaving behind a legacy permanently split between his musical brilliance and the recklessness of how he lived. Number 9. Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton's musical legacy is extraordinary. His work with the Yardbirds, Cream, and Derek and the Dominos in the 1960s and early 1970s placed him among the most celebrated guitarists of his generation. He overcame a serious heroin addiction in the early 1970s, which at the time was widely treated as a kind of personal triumph. But in August 1976, Clapton climbed onto a stage in Birmingham, England, drunk, and delivered a prolonged rant expressing support for the far-right anti-immigration views of politician Enoch Powell. He told the audience that Britain was in danger of becoming a black colony. The comments were recorded and reported widely. The response was significant enough to help spark the founding of Rock Against Racism, a major anti-racism music movement in Britain that held large outdoor concerts through the late 1970s. Clapton later attributed the speech to his alcohol consumption and said he did not hold those views. But the words were his, spoken publicly in front of a crowd. His continued relevance in music through the following decades has not erased what he said that night. Number 8. Brian Jones. Brian Jones was the founding member of the Rolling Stones. He placed the advertisement in 1962 that brought Mick Jagger and Keith Richards together with him. And for the first years of the band's existence, he was its creative center, a multi-instrumentalist who could pick up almost any instrument and make it work.
when I see you again.
But Jones was deeply unstable. His drug and alcohol use escalated steadily through the mid to late 1960s. He showed up to recording sessions impaired or not at all. He faced multiple drug convictions between 1967 and 1969, and the legal complications threatened the band's ability to tour. His relationship with Anita Pallenberg ended with violence, and she eventually left him for Keith Richards. By 1969, his bandmates had concluded he could no longer function as a working musician. He was dismissed from the group he had founded in June of that year. Less than a month later, on July 3, 1969, he was found dead at the bottom of his swimming pool at the age of 27. The official verdict was death by misadventure. The tragedy of his end does not erase the harm he caused to the people around him while he was alive. Number 7. Phil Spector. Phil Spector produced some of the most influential records in the history of American popular music. His wall of sound technique defined the sound of early 1960s pop and left a permanent mark on how records were made. He worked with the Ronettes, the Crystals, the Righteous Brothers, and later with the Beatles on the Let It Be album. But Spector's personal behavior was something else. Multiple women described him as controlling, threatening, and violent. Ronnie Spector of the Ronettes detailed in her 1990 memoir how Spector kept her effectively imprisoned in their home, threatening her if she tried to leave. She eventually escaped barefoot through a window in 1972. Other women described being held at gunpoint in his home. In February 2003, actress Lana Clarkson was found dead of a gunshot wound at Spector's California mansion. He was tried twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury, and convicted of second-degree murder in 2009. He was sentenced to 19 years to life and died in prison in January 2021. The genius of his production work was real. So was what he did to Lana Clarkson. Number 6. Don Henley. Don Henley's reputation as one of the great singer-songwriters of the 1970s is built on genuinely strong work. His contributions to the Eagles, as co-writer, drummer, and vocalist on albums like Hotel California, 1976, were central to the band's success. His subsequent solo career produced some of the most polished pop records of the 1980s. But in November 1980, a 16-year-old girl was found semi-conscious at Henley's Bel Air home. She was taken to the hospital and treated for drug intoxication. Also present that night was a 15-year-old girl. Henley was charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He pleaded no contest and paid a fine. No jail time was served. The incident was real and documented. The girls were minors. Henley faced minimal legal consequences, and his career continued largely uninterrupted, which reflects the era as much as it reflects him. His music from that period is still played constantly on classic rock radio, and his reputation has never fully absorbed the weight of what happened that night. For a generation that grew up idolizing the Eagles, it is a story that deserves to be part of the full picture. Number 5. Ted Nugent. Ted Nugent built his reputation in the early 1970s as one of the loudest and most aggressive hard rock guitarists in America. His band, the Amboy Dukes, had their moment in the late 1960s, and his solo career through the 1970s gave him an audience that responded to his high-decibel stage presence and hunter's lifestyle. Albums like Cat Scratch Fever, 1977, made him a genuine rock star. But accounts from women who encountered Nugent during his touring years have detailed behavior that goes well beyond rock and roll excess. In a 1998 interview, Nugent spoke openly about having sexual relationships with underage girls during his touring years, and described taking legal guardianship of a then 17-year-old girl in the 1970s, an arrangement that allowed him to have a relationship with her that would otherwise have been illegal in most states. The details of those accounts have been reported across multiple publications over the decades. Nugent's cultural relevance has faded significantly, replaced largely by his political commentary, which has attracted controversy on its own terms. The rock career that made him famous in the 1970s peaked before 1980, and his legacy has been complicated since by the accumulation of his own public statements about his past. Number 4. John Phillips. John Phillips was the chief architect of the Mamas and the Papas, the Los Angeles vocal group that had a remarkable run of pop hits between 1965 and 1968. He wrote and arranged most of the group's material, and his ear for harmony and commercial melody produced some of the most polished recordings of that era. California Dreamin' remains instantly recognizable decades later. But Phillips's personal conduct was deeply troubling. His heroin and cocaine use became severe by the late 1960s, contributing directly to the disintegration of the group by 1968. His daughter Mackenzie Phillips wrote in her 2009 memoir that her father introduced her to drugs when she was a teenager, and that the abuse went far beyond what any context could defend. Phillips was arrested in 1980 for drug trafficking and pleaded guilty to conspiracy to distribute narcotics. He served a brief sentence and attempted various musical comebacks through the 1970s and 1980s, but never approached the level of the Mamas and the Papas. He died in March 2001. The accounts left behind by his family paint a picture of a talented man who caused serious harm to the people closest to him. Number 3. Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley changed popular music in ways that are difficult to overstate. His recordings for Sun Records in 1954 and 1955, and his subsequent run at RCA through the late 1950s and early 1960s made him the most famous entertainer on the planet. The energy, the voice, the presence, it was all real. But what happened in the 1970s was a choice. Elvis had returned to live performance in 1969 after nearly a decade of making films, and his Las Vegas residency initially showed he still had genuine ability. But the decade that followed was defined by an accelerating addiction to prescription drugs, sedatives, stimulants, and painkillers that he obtained through compliant physicians and took in quantities that alarmed everyone around him. His weight fluctuated dramatically. He was often barely coherent on stage. He canceled tours and shows repeatedly. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, kept booking him regardless, and the people in his inner circle, the so-called Memphis Mafia, largely enabled rather than confronted what was happening. Multiple doctors supplied him with prescriptions that had no legitimate medical basis. His personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, was eventually charged with overprescribing. He had written Elvis more than 10,000 doses of various drugs in the final 20 months of his life. Elvis died on August 16, 1977, at the age of 42. The medical examiner's initial report cited cardiac arrhythmia, but later analyses pointed heavily to polypharmacy, the toxic combination of multiple prescription drugs in his system. He had every resource available to get help. He chose not to. Number 2. Chuck Berry.
Catch me playing with my ding-a-ling-a-ling-o.
Chuck Berry is one of the architects of rock and roll. His recordings for Chess Records in the mid to late 1950s, the guitar riffs, the storytelling, the stagecraft, created a template that virtually every rock band that followed borrowed from. The Beatles covered him. The Rolling Stones covered him. Keith Richards has spent decades crediting him as a foundational influence. But Berry's personal conduct was documented in ways that are impossible to overlook. In 1959, he was arrested under the Mann Act for transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines. He was convicted and served 18 months in federal prison between 1962 and 1963. Years later, in 1990, it was reported that he had installed hidden cameras in the bathrooms of his Missouri restaurant, Southern Air. A class action lawsuit was filed by women who claimed they had been filmed without their knowledge. The case was settled out of court in 1994. Berry continued performing and recording into his 80s, and his stature as a foundational figure in rock was never formally withdrawn by the industry. He died in March 2017 at the age of 90. The music he made in the 1950s and 1960s remains genuinely essential. The behavior he was convicted and sued for also genuinely happened. And the combination of those two facts is the honest version of his story.
Catch me playing with my ding-a-ling-a-ling-o.
Number 1. Sid Vicious. Sid Vicious joined the Sex Pistols in early 1977, replacing original bassist Glenn Matlock. He had almost no musical ability. By most accounts, he could barely play the bass at all. But he had a look and an attitude that fit the band's escalating chaos. The Sex Pistols were already a cultural detonator, and Vicious, born John Simon Ritchie, became the embodiment of punk's most self-destructive impulse. His relationship with Nancy Spungen was fueled from the start by heroin. Both of them were addicts, and their dynamic was widely described by people who knew them as codependent and dangerous. In October 1978, Spungen was found stabbed to death in room 100 of the Chelsea Hotel in New York City. Vicious was the only other person in the room. He was charged with her murder, though he alternately confessed to and denied killing her, and his state of mind made any consistent account impossible. He was released on bail and died of a heroin overdose in February 1979, at the age of 21, before the case could go to trial. The truth of what happened in that hotel room was never legally established. What is established is that two young people with serious addiction problems destroyed themselves. and that the mythology built around Sid Vicious in the years since has often obscured the fact that a woman died violently and no one was ever held accountable for it. The punk legend surrounding him has always sat uncomfortably alongside that unresolved reality. Going back through these stories, what stands out is how often talent and accountability existed in completely separate worlds. The music was real, the crowds were real, and the damage these people caused to the people closest to them, and in some cases to strangers, was real too. History tends to be kind to artists, but the full picture matters. If you made it to the end of this one, go ahead and leave a like. And if you want more videos like this, subscribe and stick around. There's always more history worth looking at, honestly.